The evening promises to be long, so let's not postpone it too much. So, thank you so much for coming today. Good evening, and thank you for joining us here for the event that is organized in cooperation between the Open Nuclear Network and the Vienna School of International Studies. I welcome our audience here in person in the room, but also I welcome our audience online who are watching us via live stream. Thank you for joining this very timely and I think very important conversation. 2026, the year of the nuclear review. What can we agree on? So my name is Ksenia Pernavska. I'm the Engagement and Network Coordinator of the Open Nuclear Network. It is a program of PAC Sapiens. At PAC Sapiens, we work to reduce the risks of predictable global catastrophes and ONN specifically focusing on nuclear conflict-related risks using open source research, analytical foresight, and engagement of impact-capable networks. And it is a true honor for me to be your moderator today, this evening. We meet at a moment when the decisions we take and the conversations we choose to have will shape the nuclear governments in years to come. In 2026, a few major milestones are going to happen. The review conferences of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the review conference of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the expiration of New START Treaty, the last remaining bilateral arms control agreement between the United States and Russia, and these global nuclear milestones are also unfolding alongside regional dynamics that may increase nuclear risks worldwide in Euro-Atlantic and Northeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, and you name it really. We live in a very turbulent times. 2026 could be a year of escalation and true fragmentation, even further fragmentation, or it could be a year in which we take meaningful steps to rebuild trust, strengthen norms, and reduce nuclear risks. This duality, danger, and opportunity side by side is precisely why we are here today. Because dialogue cannot resolve every challenge we face, but without a dialogue, none of these challenges are going to be resolved. And that is why we are hosting this dialogue tonight, because even a small area of agreement, some common ground at the right moment, can have a great impact when the stakes are existential. As former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld once said, never measure the height of a mountain until you reach the top, and then you will see how low it was. And I'm not trying to say that the mountain is low, it's quite high, but moments like next year can feel insurmountable and even scary until we begin the work of tackling them together. And my inspiration for today's discussion, for today's conversation, is to identify some areas of cooperation, however small, that can make the world even slightly safer. This is why Open Nuclear Network and Diplomatic Academy or Vienna School of International Studies has convened this discussion to ask really openly, constructively, and honestly, what can we still agree on? So with this question in mind, let us begin today's discussion. We will first hear opening remarks from very distinguished experts and leaders in the field. I will invite them one by one, and after that we will have a panel discussion where there will be 2 rounds of questions, and after those 2 rounds of questions you will be able to ask questions that you might have during the audience Q&A. So now I would like to invite our opening remarks speakers, and first I would like to invite on stage Ambassador George Wilhelm Gallhofer, Director for Disarmament, Non-Proliferation and Export Controls in the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. George Wilhelm, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ksenia. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, it's a pleasure from my side also to welcome you to this very timely dialogue. Indeed, 2026 may well be remembered as a pivotal year on nuclear diplomacy. Rarely have the stakes been higher and rarely have the needs and opportunities been greater. If I were to name a guiding principle for our work in 2026, it would be allowing multilateralism, informed by the best available scientific evidence, to regain the upper hand and in shaping our future of nuclear arms control and disarmament, and in shaping on how we view security, not just from an abstract state-level lens, but from a lens of humanitarian harm. We're faced with extreme challenges. You alluded to this, Ksenia: rising tensions, eroding trust, an avalanche of misinformation propelled by AI technology, dwindling arms control frameworks, the start of a renewed arms race, including nuclear capabilities, as well as nuclear doctrines and rhetoric moving in directions that severely heighten risks, risks that already were too high before. And at such a moment, we cannot retreat into unilateralism or a narrow strategic logic. History teaches us the opposite lesson. We need diplomacy most when the environment is the most dangerous. And diplomacy that must be informed rigorously, transparently, and inclusively by science. In recent years, new scientific evidence has dramatically enhanced our collective understanding of nuclear risk. We know now that nuclear detonations would create cascading humanitarian environmental effects beyond national borders, that the consequences of nuclear war would be global, and that assumptions underpinning nuclear deterrence are far more uncertain than often acknowledged. This evidence must now move to the center of nuclear debates. But fortunately, we're not starting from zero. Instead, progressive states, civil society, and scientists have set up novel or renewed mechanisms and engaged experts to guide us, such as the group of scientific and technical experts on nuclear disarmament verification, with credit to you, Ambassador Camara, the UN's independent scientific panel on effects of nuclear war, the TPNW's scientific advisory group, and many others that strengthen the factual foundation on which sound policy must rest. This knowledge has led to fundamental shifts in expectations by the non-nuclear majority of states, demanding greater transparency and accountability about the concrete security concerns that their populations are faced with through foreign nuclear weapons. We need to deepen this dialogue, and we also need to ensure that channels remain open to rebuild trust and prevent misunderstanding. This is necessary not just on a diplomatic level, but also with scientists and practitioners via a number of tracks, not least through the Open Nuclear Network, which we are very proud to host here in Vienna. Ladies and gentlemen, 2026 offers something rare: 4 major review conferences across the disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. Collectively, they offer us the chance to pursue meaningful progress on norm setting, transparency, on risk reduction, on verification, and on long overdue implementation of nuclear disarmament obligations. If we use them well, they can set a new direction for years to come. They offer us the chance to face the current multidimensional crisis with robust multilateral responses, diplomacy that is grounded in science rather than assumptions, cooperation that is resilient even amid rivalry, and a shared determination that the risks borne by humanity must guide the choices made by states. If we use these means and build on them, then 2026 can be more than a year of review. It can be a year of restoring trust, assuming responsibility, and laying the ground for renewed momentum towards a world free from the shadow of nuclear catastrophe. With this, I very much look forward to the interesting panel we have ahead of us, and thank you very much again for organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you, George Wilhelm. So for the next opening remarks, I would like to invite, and there's a feedback, Ambassador Martin Eichtinger, Director of the Vienna School of International Studies. Please.
President Muttonen, Ambassador Gallhofer, Mr. Bersbo, members of the panel, Ms. Biernawskaya, Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to welcome you here at the Diplomatic Academy, the Vienna School of International Studies, to this very timely and highly relevant event. At a time when the threat of the use of nuclear weapons is back and is again being used to exert military pressure, at a time when the rules-based international system is being undermined, more countries consider increasing their security by obtaining nuclear weapons. It is an alarming picture, but it confirms the importance of diplomacy and international cooperation, especially in the field of nuclear disarmament. International organizations and initiatives have shown what can be achieved. And also what a rather small country like Austria can contribute. Austria has been a driving force in the campaign for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we celebrated when it entered into force on the 22nd of January 2021. What can we at the Diplomatic Academy contribute? We have alumni of the Diplomatic Academy who are active in this field. Ambassador Gallhofer, and some members of ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which received, as you know, the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. I hope that their education here at the Diplomatic Academy helped them in their work on the question how to dialogue on nuclear governance and disarmament could be fostered. A sound knowledge and analytical competence are important to understand the complexity of this issue. Therefore, the topic of nuclear governance, nuclear weapons in the international order, and non-proliferation form part of the curriculum of our school. At the outset, students study the concepts of international order and security. You need to understand how and why states acquire nuclear weapons. You need to get acquainted with the so-called nuclear order, the set of rules governing the acquisition, possession, and use of nuclear technologies. You have to gain knowledge of the international organizations and civil society initiatives which support disarmament and nuclear governments. Another important component is the technological side, questions of environmental security and the risks nuclear weapons pose. I'm very happy that these important issues and milestones of global security are discussed here today. I would like to thank the Open Nuclear Network for putting together a high-ranking panel of experts to discuss ways how to foster dialogue across all divides. And maybe we can even get to the key question: is disarmament still possible? I wish you all an inspiring discussion. Thank you.
Ambassador, for very inspiring remarks, and I think it's very important question whether disarmament is still possible, desirable, hopefully so, and hopefully we'll come to that conclusion as well during the panel. Next, I would like to invite Christine Muttnen, Vice President of the Austrian Institute for European Security and Co-President of the Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, and member of the ONN Advisory Council, on stage to give her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Excellencies, a warm welcome to all of you also from my side. I have the honor to be a new member of the Advisory Council of Open Nuclear Network, an organization, as you know, committed to the prevention of nuclear conflict. The ONN Advisory Council is a small international group led by our chair, Ambassador Kent Hersted, who is here on the panel today. Throughout my political career, I have been deeply committed to addressing nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, and this commitment intensified after my upsetting and disturbing visit to Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan, the site of Soviet nuclear tests, where I witnessed firsthand the lasting impact of nuclear fallout on generations and even today. In numerous discussions, both nationally and internationally, I tried hard to bring this critical issue to the table, emphasizing, as Henry Kissinger once stated, nuclear weapons are great evil. They are not weapons of deterrence, but weapons of mass destruction. You often hear the saying that politics is like drilling into hard boards, and I wholeheartedly agree. Certainly, diplomacy faces similar challenges. However, we must acknowledge that there are stories of success. Having served as a parliamentarian for many years, I'd like to highlight the importance of parliamentarian diplomacy. It plays a crucial role in negotiating nuclear arms control by complementing traditional diplomatic efforts. The Parliamentarian Assembly of the OSCE and the IPU, the Interparliamentarian Union, are predestined for such a task. Take, for example, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT. Its successful journey, 187 states signing and 178 states ratifying the treaty, would not have been possible without the fruitful cooperation between parliamentarians and CTBTO, the organization responsible for the treaty. Nevertheless, what we are witnessing today is a dangerous resurgence of nuclear weapons. The war of words is already underway. Arms control treaties are determined, and nuclear arsenals are being modernized and expanded at incredible costs. Without effective arms control, the world risks facing a nuclear disaster, especially with the emergence of so-called small tactical nuclear weapons, many of which are significantly more powerful than those used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In any case, the words small and tactical pretend harmlessness, and they are misleading. They are misleading fakes, you could say. In the past decades, building trust, fostering dialogue, promoting cooperation, and cultivating political will have been our primary tools for reducing the threat of nuclear catastrophe. It is imperative that we return to those fundamental approaches. The expertise of our panelists today will help us gain, hopefully, some clarity in these uncertain times, and I look forward to an engaging discussion, wishing us all an informative and interesting afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine, for also giving a very good overview of what we are facing nowadays, and hopefully we'll be able to tackle some of those problems today during the panel. And finally, I would like to invite Andreas Persbo to give his opening remarks. He's the director of the Open Nuclear Network Pax Sapiens program. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you, Ambassador Gallhofer, who I have to call ambassador now. Congratulations on your appointment. For your remarks. Thank you also to the Diplomatic Academy for hosting us in your beautiful building. I noticed how old you are and how distinguished you are, and I heard from Ambassador Camara that, in fact, Lula's foreign policy advisor was educated here at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna. It's a great pleasure to be here. I want to thank members of our Advisory Council for inspiring and good remarks, and thank you, Kent. Thank you, Christine. Friends, colleagues, next year is, as we heard, a very important year for multilateral diplomacy, nuclear diplomacy. We have two major review processes that will happen. The first one is in May in New York for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the second one is later in the year on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And these meetings together tend to draw a lot of political attention. They tend to generate drama in our little community of academics and diplomats that look at this. But all of this attention sometimes risks diverting our attention from the real questions at stake, the fundamental questions at stake. And that is, what is the contribution of these treaties for states' security in the non-proliferation and disarmament regime? What is in it for them? And I think the need is straightforward. The international community has a shared interest. This is something all states have an interest in, small or big, without nuclear weapons or with them, to prevent the spread of further nuclear weapons in the world. The NPT and increasingly the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, they exist because additional nuclear weapon states would multiply potential flashpoints, would complicate deterrence relationships, and it would make crisis management difficult, if not impossible. And we all know this, and this is what is at stake. We also all know, and Christine, thank you for highlighting this, that there is no nuclear risk if there are no nuclear weapons. Nuclear abolition needs to be our long-term objective, because as long as these weapons are in existence, we cannot truly be safe. And I don't think any country in the world can truly be safe. How is anyone's security enhanced, though, if the region suddenly faces one or two new nuclear actors with new doctrines and new nuclear command systems? Most states in the world, most governments in the world have no interest of seeing this happening. And this is what unites us. And I think for those delegations, those delegates that go to New York, this is something you need to keep in mind. We need to keep in mind that the basic machinery to protect and serve this is already in place. We do have the treaty. The treaty will continue to operate even if this conference does not produce a final document. This is important to keep in mind. Legal obligations, safeguards, institutional practices do not switch off when diplomats fail to agree on language. We need to remember this. And the true is same in a different way for the TPNW. it introduces lots of new things that are valuable. Prohibitions are being clarified. There is assistance and remediation commitments. And this emerging institutional practice also will not switch off if there is no immediate progress next year. I want to say this because these conferences are neither magical solutions, nor are they fatal moments of truth. But they are opportunities for states to clarify expectations, register political commitments, and this is key, and, at best, strengthening incrementally existing frameworks that most states see as essential to their security. So what I hope to see next year, by Ambassador Gallhofer, who will be there, no pressure, is to use whatever you can. Austria is a small actor, but it is an actor, to reinforce the underlying norm that more nuclear weapons and more nuclear armed states does not make anyone safer. We need to remember this. To reinforce the idea that the two treaties, now when they are a constellation, form a new complex of non-proliferation and disarmament law. Some states would contest this and say the TPNW does not form part of anything. They are a danger to our security. These are the nuclear weapon states. They are entitled to their position. However, the TPNW is now deposited in the United Nations. It is part of international law, and you cannot just simply wish that away. You have to address that as diplomats, and you as emerging diplomats and practitioners. When there is a practical problem, it needs to be addressed. Complementary practices between the TPNW and the NPT is not good to have. It is something we must have. And I think that if states act from that shared understanding, rather than engage in theatrics of success or failure at a single conference, because we all hear this every 5 years or so, they will be better placed to preserve, carefully strengthen a treaty system that all our security depends on. So I thank you all, and I thank you for what will be an inspiring conversation.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Andreas. Thanks to all of our speakers for their framing opening remarks that I think beautifully framed the conversation we're going to have. And so without further ado, I would like to jump to our panel conversation. But before we do it, I would like to introduce you to our speakers who are on the panel today so you know them a little bit better before we get into expert conversation. So on my left here, we have Ambassador Kent Harstedt. He's a senior advisor at CMI, Marty Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, and non-resident senior fellow at the National University of Singapore. After over 25 years of service, Kent retired from the Swedish government. During his career, he held numerous distinguished positions, including Ambassador of Sweden to Singapore, Chairperson in Office, Special Envoy for the OSCE, and Swedish Government Special Envoy for the Korean Peninsula. He also served as a member of the Parliament on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committees, and he also gained experience as a political advisor across various offices, including the Prime Minister office. And we are also very happy to have him as our ONN Advisory Council Chair. So thank you, Kent, for being here and for being with us and supporting ONN and its mission. Next to my left, I have Dr. Tarja Kronberg. She's an academic and a politician in security and defense. Currently, she's a distinguished associate fellow at CIPRI and the executive director of the board of ELN, working for nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and European security. As a politician, she was a member of the Finnish Parliament, Minister of Labour, and a member of the European Parliament. As a member of the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee and Subcommittee for Security and Defense, she worked with Iran nuclear issues as the chair of the EP's delegation for relations with Iran. Her latest research includes such books as Renegotiating the Nuclear Order, a sociological approach, and nuclear multilateralism in Iran inside European negotiations. She's currently writing a book on Russian nuclear identity in a multipolar world, so stay tuned. And her past experience in Russia in the 90s is documented in transforming Russia from military to civilian economy. Thank you, Tarja, for being here. This is also the first engagement with us, and I'm very happy to have you here with us at this event. Hopefully more to come. Okay, on my right, we have Ambassador Marcelo Camara, who doesn't like to be called ambassador, from what I gather in our conversations. But he's
I'm not ambassador.
he is the director of the Department of Strategic Defense and Disarmament Affairs of the Brazilian MFA. Prior, he was the head of the Disarmament and Sensitive Technologies Division. Mr. Camara has been a career diplomat since 1995 and held various positions in Brazil and abroad, such as deputy head of the UN division and deputy head of the Brazilian delegation to the IAEA in Vienna. So welcome back. He participated in the high-level fissile material cutoff treaty expert preparatory group, in the UN group of the governmental experts on nuclear disarmament verification, and in the 5th edition of the UN group of the governmental experts on cybersecurity. Thank you, Marcelo, for being here today, and we're very happy to host you. He flew here to us from Brazil, so we're very, very thankful for your time and for making an effort to come to Vienna. And last but not least, our very own Sarah Lederman. She's a senior analyst of, well, no surprise, Open Nuclear Network, program of PAC Sapiens. And we're very proud of her. She's focusing on open source and technical analysis of nuclear programs. In addition to conducting analysis, she acts as the principal investigator for numerous internal and externally funded projects, which is important these days. Prior to joining ONN, she worked as an open source analyst at the IAEA, a graduate intern at the Center for Global Security Research at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and a contractor for the US government analyzing technical and political nuclear issues. She's currently a doctoral candidate in political science at the University of Vienna. So thank you, Sarah, for being here today and for also kind of sharing, I think, not only yours, but also ONN perspectives on these questions. So without further ado, and I know that these introductions are usually quite long, but we need to introduce our speakers so you know them better. I would like to start with the first round of questions. And the first round of questions is focused on where we are now at the moment. So kind of understanding and scaling where we are and where we are to build and what we can build on. So first, I would like to ask a first question to Kent. Kent, how do you see the current state of global nuclear diplomacy, and what common ground still exists that leaders can build upon in 2026? Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yes. So I will answer the question by not answering it, actually, because I think all the interventions so far is focusing on the nuclear issue, but the nuclear issue comes in a context of many other things, where the nuclear threat or the risk for nuclear a nuclear race and so on is coming in the context of many other things. The first we all know is that we are abandoning the world order as we know it. So the rules-based world order is now more or less gone. Instead, we have a situation again of great power competition. And I actually flew in today from Helsinki. We had a celebration of CMI turning 25 years. 900 guests listening to, amongst others, President Alexander Stubb and also Mary Robinson, the first female president of Ireland. It was very interesting to listen to both the previous leaders, but also President Stubb, who is very much in focal point of many of the things, both in Europe, when it comes to the aggression on Ukraine, but also, of course, being one of the leaders in Europe who have maybe some possibility to talk to Donald Trump. Anyway, I think what he said was one of the things also he written about, how we the last 4 years actually abandoned 30 years of world order. What has been in place for 30 years have been really abandoned in 4 years. And right now we are trying to navigate in this new situation. What is the new situation? And actually we don't really know yet, because we are still in that kind of evolution of trying to navigate what is happening here. So we have the great power race, but there's also other races going on in parallel. We have the global south racing. We have A Europe who is trying to defend their position in a way, but is still internally fragmented in some instances. We have also the divide between Europe and the US, which has been so crucial for so long time. And we are trying to do what we can to keep it intact or strong, but it's not so easy. And then we have the rise of global East, with, of course, China, but also other Southeast Asia, where I am a lot in Singapore. It's a good place to be, Singapore, if you want to see what is happening in Asia, but also India, of course. So there's a lot of things happening. Another factor is demography. The South Korean ambassador invited me for a lunch when I was in Stockholm, and I thought, since I'm somehow a North Korea specialist, I thought he wanted to speak about North Korea. But he wanted to speak about the national crisis in South Korea, only having a birth rate of 0.71%. That's very dramatic, actually. And we have the same situation in many countries. While when I'm in Nigeria, for example, one of the countries with the fastest developments of birth rate and Africa as a continent changing the world scene when it comes to trade and the importance of Africa, that will become so obvious to all of us within the coming 5 to 10 years. So for me, that this will put stress and friction between a world order that has been in place for so long, that leads to conflict and war. And I think the threshold for using violence have never been as low as it is right now. So I think we can expect more of violence, more of war, more of conflict the coming 5 to 10 years if we don't navigate in a way that we try to hamper this. And to do that, we need to have a rule-based world order, which we all respect, and that we do not maybe attack and try to go without the boundaries of what is legal in the international framework. So I'm very concerned about all of this, because all of this is driver for threats and violence and more of conflict. And of course, all of that is also ultimately leading to more of threats when it comes to the nuclear factor that we will come into more, I guess. But this is what I see. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. And thank you for highlighting, I think, especially this threshold of violence use. I mean, it's a very kind of general trend, but I think especially when it comes to nuclear escalation and the nuclear diplomacy questions, it's very, very important, because violence in the case of nuclear use is going to be, well, something else. So very important context that you gave to our discussion. Thank you. Next, I would like to invite Tarja to answer to the following questions. So in your work, you work on the nuclear dimension of the multipolar world. How do you see the emerging global order reshaping the balance between the nuclear and non-nuclear states? And what does it tell us about the current state of nuclear global governance?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It fits well. I will continue where you left the people sort of unsure. Are we in a new world order? Or are we just coming, or what is forming? And I will try to address the question of the future world order, what we agree and disagree about, and secondly, on what is the role of the nuclear dimension in the world order. And I'm trying to make 3 points. One point is that it's necessary early in the discussion of the world order to discuss the nuclear dimension. It is not too late, but it is necessary to discuss it, debate it now. Secondly, it's easier to debate something that's in the future, that is not yet there. And thirdly, I would like to focus on the thing that I think has been the worst disadvantage of the current nuclear order, and that is the relationship between the nuclear and the non-nuclear states. And so, just to say a few words about the current situation there, the power in the nuclear order, in the world order, is with the 5 nuclear weapon states who are permanent members of the Security Council with veto power. And these 5 states, they also have the legitimacy of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, saying that they are able to have nuclear weapons also in the future. And they have even a further power. If the non-nuclear weapon states would like to change the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, all these 5 have individual veto power to any changes in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So it's not an easy question, and I would like to refer little history. In 1965, before the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was agreed, the United Nations came with 5 guidelines for how this new nuclear order should be formed. And one of these was that there should be a reasonable balance between the responsibilities of the non-nuclear states and the nuclear states. And I think if we look at today, in the beginning of the NPT, there was this reasonable balance because all non-nuclear weapon states were expecting that nuclear disarmament would take place. But this balance is no longer there. And the nuclear weapon states have ignored their obligations for nuclear disarmament, and they also today ignore the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which actually was agreed at the UN by 122 countries. So we are in a very special situation. Now if we look at the future, today there's almost an agreement that we are coming into a multipolar world. And Russia and China agreed on a multipolar world already in 1997 during Primakov, and they have then, after this, developed the BRICS and this idea further. Now the US has, of course, been on the unipolar world until now, but it seems to me, I have spent just a month in Washington, that the US is also coming to the multipolar world. And Marco Rubio has said that unilateral world order is an anomaly, and he would support the multipolar world order. I don't think this is yet in any American documents, but this is at least his personal view, and I think maybe many of the things you observe in the world also fit into this pattern. Now, there are other things that there's no agreement on. There's agreement on multipolarity, almost, and there's agreement that there should be poles, regional power centers in the future. But there's no agreement on how many poles and which are these poles. And secondly, there's no agreement on the nuclear dimension, and this is my point. There are, first, in the United States, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory has published a book called Multipolarity and Nuclear Strategy, of what will be the US's problems, what kind of wars will they fight, and so forth. And their conclusion is that hostile powers to them will be China and Russia, and they also agree that North Korea and Iran may be problematic. Russia doesn't have any studies about the nuclear dimension formally yet, but Dmitry Trenin, who is one of the most well-known researchers, he has given an interview about the nuclear dimension in the multipolar world. And his point is that Russia, of course, sees that there are more than 3 great powers, there will be maybe 8 to 10 poles. And his view is that all of them should be nuclear. So we are moving from a world order with a very strong power with the nuclear weapon states to a multipolar world order where the ideas currently deal about the nuclear weapons, and this is the point. So I think it's important that to discuss, as I said, this situation and to try to come with some views. And I think if we in the past have agreed that the world without nuclear weapons is the goal, no nuclear weapons is the goal. This goal, I think, is being pushed into the past, and now we are talking about a world where we can avoid nuclear war. And I think in this latter case, especially when we are talking about avoiding nuclear war, it's important that the non-nuclear voices are also heard. And then
Thank you.
give you the answers later.
Thank you, Tarja, and thank you for this overview. And especially, I think it's very important to highlight that the nuclear dimension remains necessary in the international relations discussions, and especially in this dimension, not only nuclear weapon states' voices are matter, but also non-nuclear weapon states. And this is a great segue to our next speaker. So Marcelo, from Brazil's perspective, where does the minimal common ground remain in multilateral diplomacy, and what areas of convergence matter for the global majority?
So thank you, Xenia, and good evening to all. I'd like to thank the Open Nuclear Network and the Vienna School of Diplomatic Studies for this kind invitation. I commend both institutions for convening this timely seminar. It's an honor for me to be with these distinguished speakers here, and also to be in the oldest diplomatic academy. I think it's a reminder that in turbulent times are when diplomacy is most needed. So, I'm very encouraged for the number of young diplomats of the students attending this panel. Just a couple of years before I was on their side. That's why only begrudgingly I accept the title of ambassador. But I think the younger generation of diplomats, perhaps we face a much more challenging environment than my own generation and also Georg's generation faced when began with this career. But trying to answer your question. So we are now 5 months away from the 2026 NPT Review Conference to be held in New York in April, May. It will take place against take place against the background of unprecedented adverse geopolitical circumstances, and the fact that the 2 previous RevCons and the last 3 preparatory committees were unable to adopt consensus documents did not bode well for a meaningful 2026 NPT Review Conference. So the common ground for the global majority is to secure the NPT as a credible treaty, as the cornerstone of the nuclear global regime, and one of the pillars of the global security architecture. The inability of state parties to achieve even the lowest common denominators in the latest review conference and the lack of any tangible progress in the pillar of nuclear disarmament have significantly eroded the NPT's effectiveness. There is a sense that the NPT has been misused by some actors. I think my colleagues have dwelled on this, just to maintain the status quo. I would argue then that a 3rd review conference in a row without reaching a relevant level of consensus will most likely cast a disturbing shadow over the treaty, putting into question its relevance. Another common ground is even more obvious: to work on risk reduction to avert a nuclear confrontation. Whereas the Cold War is generally considered a period of highest nuclear confrontation risk, the contemporary situation is no less dangerous. The case can be made that the world is more now insecure than any point in time since the Cold War. Nuclear weapons are now thousands of times more potent than those dropped in 1945. The qualitative improvement continues. Thresholds for their use are more opaque. And more often than at any other time in recent history, coercive actions have been undertaken in violation of international law. A book by Annie Jacobsen, published last year, titled Nuclear War, a Scenario, describes a chilling sequence of events involving nuclear weapons that lead to global nuclear catastrophe. The concurrent onset of so many disquieting developments in today's world order, my colleagues have addressed this, led the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Science and Security Board in January this year to reset the doomsday clock to 89 seconds before midnight, the closest ever. It's a warning not to be taken lightly. This prompts me to welcome the recent establishment by the General Assembly of the United Nations of an independent scientific panel on the effects of nuclear war. Well, my response to the second part of your question, Ksenia, is perhaps a corollary of this long-standing crisis surrounding the NPT. I would assume that overall majority converge on the need to bolster the NPT as a functioning treaty. We must therefore weather the current geopolitical storm, foster the treaty's credibility, and retain its aspirational goal to achieve a world without nuclear weapons. To that end, state parties should take the 2026 Revcon as an opportunity to renew their commitment to the treaty's principles and objectives. Another possible area of convergence should be the strengthening of the role of the United Nations disarmament machinery in preparing for a fourth special session on disarmament, both long overdue in my view. We cannot take as normal the almost 3-decade-long standoff in the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva. We will be seen as poor caretakers of public goods should we continue to cast a blind eye to the current dysfunctionality of the UN disarmament machinery. So that perhaps the elements for the first question. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Marcelo. And I think, especially, highlighting the NPT is so important, considering we have some diplomats in the room. So please hear us, and hopefully, we can make sure that the next review conference will be more successful than others. And also thank you for the reading recommendation about the nuclear war scenarios. It's a really great book, so please do go ahead and check it out after the event. Last, I would like to invite Sarah. So we've heard a lot of political context and diplomatic context of what's happening, but I would really like to ask you about more of a technical picture. So from analytical and database standpoint, where do you see some areas of scientific and technological cooperation, or at least some shared rules of the road that could help reduce the nuclear risks? Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So as Ksenia's question alluded to, I'm not a diplomat, and I'm actually a scientist, and so I'm going to be taking this from a technical perspective on where I see cooperation happening in the past and currently today. So right now, obviously, we've heard there's a lot of areas where we can't really agree on things, can't agree on treaty language, on document language at all, getting very nitpicky. In my home country in the US, we don't see agreements lasting more than 4 years, 8 years if we're lucky or unlucky. And this is where we can turn to the more scientific and technical cooperation as a way to build bridges and ensure that lines of communication can stay open. It's a task that's even more important when top-level governments struggle to speak constructively to each other, and a lot of the rules of the road, unfortunately, have been thrown out. So we see nuclear reactors being used as pawns in war. We see discussions on the resumption of nuclear testing, and other norms that we've taken for granted over the years being disrupted. But if we look at the past, there's a number of areas where scientific cooperation has overcome really severe geopolitical divides and accomplished some really impressive feats. There was numerous cooperation between Soviets and American scientists throughout the Cold War. specifically on space missions, where it allowed for informal exchanges of information. They developed bonds and would, see each other's homes and go to each other's places for dinner and cook with each other. It's a way to connect on a human-to-human level. And even in the very early days of the Cold War, we saw the International Geophysical Year, which is an effort from 67 countries to observe geophysical phenomena and gather data from all over the world. It doesn't sound relevant, but I promise it is. The observations there confirmed the importance of Antarctica and directly led to the development and signing of the Antarctic Treaty, which created an international territory free from nuclear weapons and open for scientific research. So that in and of itself significantly reduced nuclear risk just from an agreement to keep it nuclear free. Pugwash has been an important pace setter and convener, leading to tangible outcomes based on scientific exchanges that reduce nuclear risk. It's led directly to the Partial Test Ban Treaty, the NPT, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, SALT I, INF, the list could go on and on. And it's not just in the past. Pugwash continues to accomplish its mission of bringing states together. And we have even more important, not more important, but additional multi-state efforts from historic rivals. So for example, the Sesame Accelerator in Jordan was developed with significant cooperation from historic rivals like Egypt, Israel, Pakistan, and other regional entities coming together to bring science for good. We see efforts like ITER, bringing together China, the EU, India, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and the US working together to fund and construct the world's largest tokamak, which is has a special place in my heart. I started in fusion energy, so I like to see this happen. Just last month, we saw a major Russian contribution to the facility despite the increased tensions from nuclear testing threats being lobbed about at a high level. So efforts like these demonstrate that people on the quote-unquote other side of the geopolitical issues are just curious humans looking to learn, discover, benefit humanity. And these are all underlying requirements for the empathy to work together to reduce nuclear risks. So when things get heated, it's really important to know that there's a human sitting across from you at the negotiating table. Work is done on a people-to-people level. It's often done at lower levels with, lowly scientists like me talking to each other over dinner and creating scientific cooperation and treaties. So there are lots of pockets of cooperation currently happening and have happened in the past, as I just talked about, and will happen in the future, hopefully, as I will hopefully talk about in the next round of questions. We can't fight climate change or pandemics alone, and we need to cooperate with each other and learn from each other. And hopefully cooperating on these less politically sensitive issues, although they carry plenty of sensitivities, could lead to cooperation in more tense areas like nuclear risk and nuclear use and nuclear disarmament. So if you're already working with somebody on one topic, it's a lot easier to pivot from that topic than starting a relationship from scratch. So while cooperation is not always easy and longstanding apolitical organizations are becoming more politicized today, especially with the threat of disinformation, we see things like the IAEA and nuclear facilities in Ukraine under political attack. Scientific cooperation is still occurring even between rivals under the IAEA umbrella or under other multilateral fora, and hopefully this could lead to future productive conversations.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important to emphasize the human-to-human interaction, but also that even in the hardest of times, there are areas where countries still can cooperate, talk to each other, work with each other, and that can build kind of this ladder of cooperation for more sensitive and difficult issues, which history proves, and you've very beautifully talked to us about it. So thank you so much for that perspective. And now I would like to get into the round 2 of this discussion, where I really want to ask our speakers about what opportunities lie ahead in 2026 and beyond. What are some political openings for renewed cooperation, for building trust? Basically, with this round, we would really want us to answer the question, what can we agree on? And in the interest of time, I will not repeat each question. I want to ask to all of you, because it's very similar between all of you. But I would like to start with Kent, if you can share with us some ideas on potential agreement points.
Okay. First, I want to say how much the nuclear threat is part of real politics today. I think it's very clear, maybe, that it would have been maybe a even harsher response to Russia if it wouldn't been a nuclear state, I think. I think North Korea, looking at what happened to Ukraine, means that North Korea is not having no. I was there when US negotiated with North Korea in Hanoi and some other instances. And I think having North Korea see what Ukraine is in kind of situation because of it partly because of that it doesn't have nuclear weapons, means that North Korea have its own logics of conclusion that we can never abandon nuclear weapons. Rather, we need to strengthen our capacity. I think similar when they look at Iran and the attack on Iran, thinking from the North Korean perspective, what about if they really would have had nuclear weapons? Would that have happened? So, I mean, it's very visible, but invisible all the time, the nuclear question in so many instances. And I could give more examples. So that is what we need to relate to when we are talking about nuclear risk reduction and trying to take initiatives. For me, that is not just in O&M, but also in CMI, which is now the biggest peace and mediation organization within the European Union. We are about 200 people. So, I mean, there's a lot of difficulties here today because there's so many parties that do not talk to each other. And that is, I mean, the start for anything is that you talk to each other. It's even sensitive to take initiative to try to talk. And some have deliberately closed off and do not want to talk. So even that needs to be reinforced. I think, I mean, we are, of course, reflecting upon this, how it can be so cemented as it is right now in many instances, that the spiral is just getting tougher and tougher and harder and more dangerous. And I mentioned before, but that the threshold for more violence is so low. And we see violence is popping up in so many different places, whether it's on the border between Thailand and Cambodia, or whether it's India and Pakistan, or where it's... and we can expect more of it. But we also expect that maybe there will be a counter at some point. It will turn to the other side again. At some point it will turn. It's not the natural law, but we think that there will be a counter somehow to this, and that we as an organization have more requests for participation in mediation of confidence building than ever in our 25-year history, is also a signal that many would like to see more of efforts of trust building and confidence building, which is the foundation. If there's no communication, no dialogue, there will be no foundations for any kind of agreements. But this is where we are right now, and it's the paradox is it's sad to see our organizations, CMI, grow so fast because there is so many conflicts in the world. But it's also where ONN is so relevant, and we are also growing fastly actually, because more and more become aware of that we need to do more to avoid nuclear risk. So I think that this is maybe the positive news, that more and more see the need of these two organizations to do more efforts in confidence building when maybe states cannot do it. Because right now many states are stuck in certain positions. And that's when we as think tanks, civil society, can do jobs and work that states cannot do at this point. So I see that as a positive signal. The only concern around that is that we see huge investments in the military industry, but very little investments in peace and mediation and confidence building. Here then there needs to be some kind of wake-up call for governments that they need to invest also in this part. Vienna, I have so fond memories, here concerning a long background in OSCE, but also OSCE and many of the traditional organizations we have is soul searching right now because of they are in crisis when not all the members that normally are under the roof are there any longer. So we need to be innovative and try to find new ways and try to use this space to build confidence.
Thank you, Kent. Thank you for highlighting the roles of the NGOs and civil society. I think, again, in this room or those listening to us online, I'm sure a lot of us are coming from those institutions, and this is definitely kind of very reassuring to hear that there is place for us to have real impact in mediation and confidence building between the states, especially on those topics where states do not really agree with each other or cannot talk to each other. Even almost said that we still have jobs, right? I mean, it's great that we still have our jobs, but it's sad that there is a demand for it in that regard. Okay, Daria, what do you think about opportunities and openings?
I think, first of all, that it is not given that all sort of leadership in global governance in the future has to be nuclear. Not all poles have to be nuclear. And if I look around the world, then I see 5 regions, and in multipolarity, there's a regional promise in a way that power will be distributed among many more poles, and they will be equal, and there are a lot of good principles, like always when you think about principles. But there are 5 nuclear weapon-free regions, zones in the world. And so if I was to look for some place to at least 5, if you have all these nuclear weapon states, we have tried to balance this in a new nuclear order. I would really look at the regional nuclear weapon-free zones. They have legal basis. They have not 100%, but they have a statement from all the nuclear weapon states that they don't attack these states by nuclear weapons. And also, if you look at the 5 regions, there's not one example where a country has left a nuclear weapon-free zone. So it's, in a way, it's a secure place for countries to be. And so, in a way, having, and now I go back to multipolarity, having these regions as also regions in the world that have part in the governance, so that at the tables where world governance is discussed, there will be nuclear weapons states, but also nuclear weapon-free zone representatives. And of course, if you look at the world today, Africa is obvious. South America was the first nuclear weapon-free zone in the world from '67. It has amazing results. 2 military dictatorships that actually abolished their dictatorship and abolished their nuclear programs at the same time, and have since built regional verification of nuclear weapons, and also now have, I think it's half a year ago or so, when Argentina and Brazil declared a common nuclear program on the civil side. So this kind of confidence building happens in these places, and it's something that should be lifted in the global governance in order to make it more visible than it is today. And if you see where are the nuclear weapon states concerned, it's China, India, Pakistan, Russia, North Korea, and then you have all these other large areas, South America, Africa, and parts of Europe also, which don't have nuclear weapons. So in a way, I am talking for a dialogue on the high level between nuclear weapon and non-nuclear states. And I think, in a way, when talking about the NPT, I really am in doubt whether re-establishing the NPT will be a solution to this trust building and dialogue between non-nuclear states and nuclear weapon states, at least it requires a lot of effort. But just as a final point, I think before the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was agreed in 1970, there was this UN statement from '65, where the UN took a statement about what is necessary in a nuclear order, with 5 points: nuclear disarmament, this balance between nuclear and non-nuclear states, and 3 others, which I don't remember right now. But maybe this would be the time where the UN should come up with new principles for nuclear dimension in the new world order. Thank you.
Thank you, Tarja. And also, I think especially the highlight about the nuclear weapon-free zones. During the time when we speak, there is a meeting actually of the experts of the UN panel on nuclear weapon-free zones happening in New York. So there is a lot of movement there, and something definitely to watch online, but also within the diplomatic settings, and pay more attention to during the NPT conferences or other big gatherings. Marcelo, what do you think about opportunities for 2026 and beyond?
So I see some opportunities and openings in, say, in ancillary areas, in less politically charged areas. So I believe that these openings are not only possible but useful.
Thank you.
Sorry for that. I will repeat my point. So I think that openings and possibilities are in, let's say, in areas that are less politically charged. So I believe that they are not only possible, but useful, and then at least for keeping a degree of momentum. So I would say, Xenia, maintaining regular reporting on the part of states possessing nuclear weapons could, for instance, go a long way in promoting transparency, generating confidence, and setting positive examples. Provide a greater information to civilian society, particularly on the risks of nuclear weapons, as well as on their humanitarian and environmental consequences, is crucial to its greater engagement. I think that one of the openings for constructive dialogue in 2026, and perhaps beyond, is to continue to undertake technical work on the verification of nuclear disarmament. So this prompts me to refer to the recent adoption by the General Assembly was last Monday, of a resolution tabled by Brazil and Norway. The reference is A/C1/80L59, which established in the United Nations a group of scientific and technical experts on nuclear disarmament verification. The acronym is GSTE-NDV. So Brazil and Norway, so we are aware that the major impediment to nuclear disarmament is the lack of political will, particularly on the side of nuclear weapon states. But on the other hand, we are also persuaded that nuclear disarmament verification is a very complex undertaking, which encompasses a broad range of scientific and technological issues. So to address these challenges in a scientific and inclusive group would bring about tangible benefits when there be political will to realize nuclear disarmament. So building on what Sarah said, a more general experience indicates that scientists, when challenged, are eager to engage and contribute to resolve important issues relating to global security. This was demonstrated not only by the group of scientific experts that functioned for 20 years prior to the CTBT, but also by the International Panel on Climate Change. Environmental scientists worked for decades within this forum to provide the scientific basis for the 2016 Paris Agreement on climate change. I'd like also perhaps to elaborate a little more on some very, I would say, opportune points that Tarja made. So coming from the Latin America and Caribbean area, I could not, I would say, help mentioning the very positive experience by the Tlatelolco Treaty, which, as Tarja said, established the first zone free of nuclear weapons in a dense populated area. The first nuclear weapons zone was, as Sarah said, was the Antarctic Treaty, but in a dense populated area was in Latin America and the Caribbean. So today, perhaps it can be a truism, nuclear weapons free zone, but at that time, I think was a visionary step. So we, the Latin America and the Caribbean, we negotiated this treaty prior to the NPT. So, so I believe that consolidating and expanding nuclear weapons free zone, which encompasses or comprises more than 110 states now, so are important areas, Xenia, that where more focused and integrated work could take place, including for creating or improving regional security arrangements. So this prompts me to welcome the current GGE, Xenia has just mentioned, on nuclear weapons free zone that are now in the assembly in New York. I am confident that the report of this group will contribute to update the role of nuclear weapons free zones in the current nuclear global order. So my last point is, as Satara has already mentioned, I think also a pioneering, I would say, role by Brazil and Argentina in the beginning of the 90s. I don't know how much of you are acquainted with the realities of South America, but in Brazil and Argentina, we had in the 80s, even before, 2 military dictatorships, and both of them managed to master the nuclear fuel cycle. So we have a strong prospect at that time that we can emerge 2 nuclear weapon states in South America. So by demonstrating a firm political will, so the 2 fledgling democracies, decided to check, to balance each other through cross inspections. So this averted, a scenario of 2 nuclear weapon states in South America. I would say that the principle that is based this, I'll say, scheme of cross inspections, which is managed by an agency, is the ABAC, is the Brazilian Argentine Agency for Accounting and Control of Nuclear Material, is neighbors watching neighbors. Yeah, I want to be naive to say that the geopolitical circumstances in South America are the same in the Middle East or in Asia or elsewhere. But having said that, I also believe that some lessons can be drawn on the experience of Brazil and Argentina, and then perhaps enlighten ways to allay tensions, nuclear tensions in other parts of the globe.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcelo. I've been taking a lot of notes on potential recommendations from this panel, so thank you for adding a lot on my list. And Sarah, what do you think about potential openings for 2026 and beyond from scientific technological perspective?
Yeah, so one of the key areas that I see that could help reduce nuclear risk is nuclear safety. It's a global issue. Radiological contamination doesn't know borders, and yet it raises geopolitical tensions, but it can be a way to have a conversation between rivals. So continuing a bit from Ken's line of analysis on North Korea, as that's also my area of focus, there are legitimate concerns over the safety of North Korean nuclear facilities. Just recently we heard about uranium contamination possibly moving in groundwater down to South Korea. And as technical experts haven't been allowed at these nuclear facilities in many years, it's unclear what safety or security measures are being implemented there, and if they're substandard or if they exist at all, and if they could be affecting neighboring states. But if we could promote technical cooperation there and try to keep it as apolitical as possible, we could not only address a potentially hazardous situation with a fundamentally scientific solution, but it could open the door to dialogue. If a country like North Korea could see that partners or even rivals are trying to actually help them and help the population and ensure facilities are safe, perhaps there could be some softening of attitudes, which might lead to constructive talks in other areas. And nuclear safety in North Korea is something many countries are interested in the region and globally. And like I said, it's an area of focus of ONNs at the moment. This sort of cooperation does require a lot of commitment on both sides. And as we saw in the 90s, the US promised a lot of aid And due to a number of factors, including North Korean noncompliance, the aid was slow to be delivered and eventually abandoned. I'm talking aid specifically in the nuclear reactors. And this ended up hurting relations in the long run, and it caused a lot of trust to be permanently damaged. So that's to say, a lot of positives can come out of this technical cooperation, but it requires a lot of time and resources and strong commitment to ensure it doesn't backfire as it did before. So as has been mentioned a lot of times before already on this panel and in the opening remarks, another area of cooperation we could see that could lead to nuclear risk reduction is the UN panel on the effects of nuclear war. And this panel would be a great venue to bring together a lot of scientists from across the world to reduce nuclear risk, understand the effects of nuclear weapons, which also lead a bit into nuclear safety as well. But unfortunately, a lot of nuclear armed states or suspected nuclear armed states are missing from that panel. So it requires a lot of commitment from countries that were noticeably absent, and more support from across the nuclear armed spectrum could strengthen this dialogue in the future. So the continuation of Pugwash, the facilities that I mentioned before, and other scientific facilities could be areas of both nuclear and non-nuclear peaceful technical cooperation to not only help dialogue and soften perspectives, but also help humanity as a whole to democratize and spread technology for good. So I know this was a short speech, but I am cautiously optimistic for 2026 as long as we have people that are willing to put in the work and the time commitment and attend dialogues like these and actually hear people out.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. And I think I'm really happy to kind of end this round on a very hopeful and positive note. And I do think that the scientific and technological areas do have much more promise than diplomacy at the moment. But, you know, I think diplomacy should catch up with our scientists and technologists and work together, I guess. So I think the matter is the science diplomacy, I think, is one of the important principles of building trust between the countries. So maybe if we do a lot more of that in 2026 and beyond, that will bring us better results than we have at the moment. On this note, I would actually like to open the floor to questions from the audience. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand. We have Nikita who will bring the microphone to you. Please introduce yourself very briefly and ask a question to our panelists. And please mention who are you asking the question to as well, so it's easier to navigate the Q&A. Okay, we see the questions at the back.
Thank you. My name is Asali. I represent World Institute for Nuclear Security. I wanted to add to what Marcelo Camaro just said about ABAC, Brazil and Argentina. We see that happen in Finland and the Netherlands, for example, having that in another field of security. And also ASEAN, as far as I know, they have joint exercises, so to see how they can bring in nuclear security, for example, to enhance regional stability. So definitely a great example. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the comment. Okay. We have a question right here. So first, Amanda, and then Hilding.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for holding this event. My question is for Ambassador Kent. Given your point that we are leaving one world order and entering another, how do you believe this changed the role that international organizations perform in advancing nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation? Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And let's do one more, and then we'll respond.
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Hilding Lundqvist. I'm the Deputy Permanent Representative at our embassy here in Vienna from the Sweden's embassy. And first of all, thank you for a very rewarding discussion, and also for this focus towards the end on the positive openings potentially, despite all the challenges. It's a nice change. But looking ahead, and I think Andreas and we talked about the NPT RevCon and talking about perhaps an outcome, not having an outcome, not being a failure. Even though I hear that probably most are still thinking in terms of trying for an outcome document, from the panel, would it be better to already now, you think, focus on alternatives? What could be, you mentioned a meaningful NPT RevCon. What would be the minimum to sort of aim for in terms of a meaningful RevCon in case we look at alternatives already now?
Thank you, Hilding. I think we'll start answering for now. Kent, let's start with you, since the first question was towards you, and then we'll get into the NPT question.
Yeah, it doesn't look so optimistic in the short perspective, I must say, because it seems like we are going into quite a cold period of time of maybe transactional and more of egoistic perspectives. And the reaction when major player is taking that kind of position, it can influence many others to do kind of the same, to save themselves in a way. I think here in Europe we are trying to stick together as good as we can. But even in Europe, it's fragmented. I mean, it's not even easy to keep things together here either. But I'm basically a very optimistic person, and I think there will be a counter reaction when things swings too far to one direction. I think there will be a counter. I think also being a former politician, I of course look with big interest of what will happen in the midterm elections in the US next year, what will happen there. Because I also believe in a society like the United States, there will be a reaction for people, and since it's a democracy, there's possibilities for changes. It's not all countries that have that ability to change things through the vote, but that would have a great impact if we would see some kind of changes there. But US aside, there's still big things happening in the world right now. I mean, we have the rise of the global south, we have the rise of global east. That is also things that will, so I didn't say all the things. I mean, we also have climate change, we have many other, I mentioned demography, I have the rise of many other powers, so it's not just only US. I mean, there's so many things happening at the same time. We have war and conflict in so many places right now, so there's so many factors. It's a very complex situation. But all of this, I think, I am basically an optimistic person, and I think there will be a reaction to all of this, and I hope that will give some hope to us, and that it also, all of this is also helping maybe countries that have been a little bit diverse before coming together. So there's also those movements happening. External threats, you could say, makes people who might have had a few indifferences come together. So I think there is reactions that we might have not really seen the full strength of yet. So I'm not totally, negative. I think in all the negative things we see, I think there will also come certain good things out of that. I think, for example, if I would live in Africa, I would think that they have a very optimistic future. I mean, there's a lot of good things that will happen to them, because a lot of trade now, a lot of investments, a lot of opportunities is coming their way. So it's not like dark everywhere and negative. There is also good things happening, and also many people who live who have lived in poverty might rise out of the changes in the world right now. So it's not like negative all over, but there's also possibilities. But of course, short term, egoism and the global world order as we know it is in big challenge right now.
Thank you, Kent. The question about the NPT, Tarja, do you want to start?
Yeah. I think the NPT is in a very difficult place because of the militarization. I mean, there's a risk of militarization of non-proliferation after the Israeli and US strikes against Iran. And so I think, first of all, if I was to give some advice to diplomats, I think one of the most important things would be to keep Iran in the NPT. They have never wanted to leave. They have threatened, and I have followed it very closely, also written books about it. And they want to stay in the NPT. They are probably the most foundational country in the NPT. But they are now forced to both threaten and maybe even go into action. So if they, as far as I know, there's no negotiations going on now, and I think this is a problem that it should be. If there's any possibility of initiating meaningful negotiations about the Iran case, it would be right now, so they don't leave the NPT. Because if they leave the NPT in May, who knows what will happen? The second question about the consensus reports. I have followed the NPT's discussion about this consensus report, and there was a period when I think it was Dhanapala and Einhorn in the US who discussed this, that are the consensus reports actually necessary, and could there be some alternatives? And I think it was Einhorn from Carnegie who said that maybe it could be divided into two. So you had a report where you had a part where there was consensus, and then you have a different part which was the disagreements, so that this would sort of ease. I mean, this is a technical solution, and I don't know whether there's political support for it, but things like that could be discussed. But ultimately, I think that one should reevaluate the value of the NPT and say, do we really want to keep it? And if you really want to keep it, then you have to keep it. If you don't want to keep it, if there are alternatives, then go in other directions.
Thank you, Daria. Do you want to add anything on the NPT meaningful
Yeah,
outcome?
so I think it's a very opportune question. I think it's very debatable what a meaningful REVCON is. I think it's in the eye of the beholder. But let me perhaps consider a couple of points. You know, last time that a REVCON issued their final document, 2010. So if we do not issue anything next year, the national community will be lacking a document, a consensus document, more than 15 years. So I have a strong reservation with a document that means almost nothing, a watered-down document. But in such a disparate times, such as this, I think a final document would help to maintain at least the system working, to maintain the credibility of the NPT. In the last review conference, Brazil, my own country, we are very disappointed with the contents of that final document. But we are able to support it, to uphold it, for the benefit of the systemic values that we attach to the NPT. So if you ask me what would be a meaningful NPT outcome for next year, so for instance, not being too exhaustive, but the recognition of nuclear weapon state by the Reagan-Gorbachev formula, for me it would be a step forward. To have, let's say, arms control between most of our United States and Russia. So on this point, if the United States and Russia do not renew the New START in upcoming February, look, we are going to come back to the situation of 1974, when the first agreement was adopted, the SALT I. First time ever, 1974, the two nuclear superpowers will be unbound by any treaty. So it's a very worrisome, this situation. So for the non-nuclear weapon states to renew their commitment to the safeguards of the IAEA, to the authority of the IAEA, in the third pillar, you know, to, let's say, foster, let's say, cooperation for peaceful use, perhaps in a more unconstrained way. So, the former president of the last review conference, Gustav Laune, our dear friend, 2 days ago, he said something that I think is very wise. He said, so in turbulent times, let's come back to basics. The point is the basic has not been complied with, has not been respected in the RevCon. So.
Thank you, Marcelo. Sarah, do you have anything to add? Yeah, the NPT is not the most positive topic. I think we have time for one more round of questions. Please. Okay, we have here Nikita first, David. Okay, we have a lot. Okay, so let's collect 4 and then answer all of them quickly.
Thanks very much. Back to basics is also my theme. My name is David Pronto. I'm in the Executive Secretary's office at the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization. Sorry, closer to my mouth. Okay. My name is David Pronto. I'm in the Executive Secretary's office at the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, where I just joined actually this year after a decade in safeguards, where I expected things to be a little bit quieter than they have been. So in the spirit of back to basics, my question for the panel focuses on essentially the message that my boss had taken to the PrepCon this year also, which was focused on a kind of defense of what we've built, particularly in terms of the moratorium on nuclear testing that has, 30 years old, or again, it's most of the major powers at this point. Also the monitoring system that can tell us if one has happened. That feels like something we still can maybe all agree on, perhaps in language that is really clear, shall we say. So my question to you is, what do you think of the chances of something like that, and what might be achievable in that domain given where we are now?
Thank you. Let's collect other questions and then you will respond to whatever you would like to respond. Raise your hands, please, because I don't have photographic memory. Okay, Shukur. Then Farouk.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Shukur. I work at the UN Women as the international consultant on youth engagement. And I actually have 2 questions, but I'll be rather very quick. 1 question, all right. Thank you very much for all speakers and the great moderator. I heard a couple of times the definitions that the speakers used, trust building and confidence building. And that is very interesting because notably this year marks the International Year of Peace and Trust. Why do I know that? Because it was proclaimed at the General Assembly by the initiative of Turkmenistan, and I'm from Turkmenistan. And I also heard a couple of mentions of nuclear weapon-free zones, right? Central Asia happens to be one of those very few ones. My question would be about neutrality. What do you think is the role of neutral and non-aligned states in promotion and in nuclear disarmament overall? Thank you.
Thank you. Raise your hands again. So George, yeah, also, okay. So let's start with this question, then George Wilhelm, and then 2 more there. Okay, I'm sorry, we have a lot.
Thank you very much. I am Feroz from Pakistan, CEO of the Real Change, which is working in Pakistan and in European Union. My first question to the panel is that recently you have seen the tension between Pakistan and India, and how do you see this situation in your view? And the major question I want to ask: how can we foster genuine trust and re-engage nuclear powers in the disarmament process?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. George Wilhelm.
Thanks a lot. Just quickly wanted to pick up on 2 points, 1 question, 1 comment. One is this question of polls that you very much highlighted, and actually your opinion on polls necessarily being countries or being sort of global, or rather being thematic. Because one of the things that I see a lot is, of course, the point that you mentioned very much in nuclear weapon-free zones, which I completely subscribe to. But I think in a sense we're also seeing a moment when this is becoming also a center of new power. You're seeing nuclear weapon-free zones consolidate and actually starting to play a much more vocal and powerful role, also partially sort of consolidated via the TPNW, where you now have the majority of states in the world being either signatories or ratifying countries. The second element, I think that was yours, Kent, was this point on re-engagement on the risks of nuclear weapons, because you're very right that this is something that really in the 90s, 2000s had very much slipped out of people's consciousness, but now this is actually quite a positive, to reinforce the positive message, element that people are actually starting to be aware of just how high the risks are and how much they are growing, and that actually does open us a possibility of generating real political momentum to generate change in a way that we haven't, which could also feed into the NPT, which could also feed into a better conversation between the haves and the haves not. I mean, one element, the TPNW, for example, states putting out a security concerns report, trying to engage to show what the real concerns are by the non-nuclear majority on nuclear weapons for their own security, and trying to offer and show up fields that, for example, additional transparency could help to bridge those divides. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And let's take the last two questions from there, and then we will address whichever you would prefer. I think we had, yeah, here and.
Thank you so much. My name is Mahmoud. I'm a counselor at the Mission of Egypt here in Vienna. I want to thank you for holding this event. It was very informative. I would say as well, all the speakers gave us a whole spectrum of view of how the strings of this very challenging matrix coming in the coming year and our expectations. I want to bring two elements to the mix and a question as well, which is the creation of the Middle East free zone, which is the cornerstone of the extension of the NPT in 1995. And if the panel has any expectations or views, how would this interplay given the very complex situation in the Middle East, and as well as you rightly presented the world order as well. I want also to bring us to the Vienna part of the discussion. Since we're here, the agency is a guardian of two pillars of the three pillars of the NPT, and they have vested experience as well in the first pillar, in disarmament, taking into consideration the experience of South Africa. And I heard Marcelo when he mentioned about the developments in New York and the group of the scientific advisors when it comes to the verification. And I want to ask as well, Marcelo or the panel, if they envisage a role of the agency to help us move forward and also build momentum scientifically, but also with the vested experience that they have. A general question, but maybe this has been answered as well, but what would you, as a panel as well, what would you think the threshold of failure of the NPT? I've heard Tarja alluded to the fact that there will be consequences of another country leaving NPT. All of us, we believe, everyone, all the members of the treaty, we believe that this system must be sustained and must continue, but the threshold of failure is we're approaching it step by step, knowingly or unknowingly. So what would be the options for after a possible another failure of the NPT review conference, particularly for non-nuclear weapon states? We're seeing weakening of the peaceful uses pillar here in Vienna. We're seeing even small steps like transparency, accountability, policy of no first use. All of these discussions are not seeing any advancements being in the prep comms or in the review conference. So what are the options beyond possible failure of a review conference? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we had the last question in that, Ambassador, right?
Thank you very much. I'm Kamran Akhtar. I'm the ambassador of Pakistan in Vienna. And by training, I happen to be a nuclear scientist, so I can at least relate to what Sarah was saying earlier on. I was hesitant to take the floor since Pakistan is not a party to the NPT, yet we believe in a rule-based order, and we believe that international non-proliferation norms should be upheld. As a middle power, we believe that the best security guarantee for countries like Pakistan is a strong rule-based international order, and therefore we would like the norms to be preserved, and whatever modest outcome of the NPT review conference, it will be useful. And even those states which are not parties to the NPT, they do pay attention to what happens in the context of the NPT review conferences. So we believe that it's very important, as Marcelo said, we need to maintain the momentum. Even if nothing else, we should have some declaratory statements coming out which are against the use of nuclear weapons. And we will be very happy to subscribe to such statements as well. And another important point which comes to my mind is that whenever we talk about coming up with some solutions, we talk in terms of nuclear weapon states as opposed to non-nuclear weapon states. But I believe now is the time when countries, like-minded countries across regional divides, whether it's NAM or EU, they should come together and raise a strong voice in terms of supporting the strengthening of international norms and speak out against air erosion, because it doesn't just concern the greater nuclear weapon powers. Whenever a treaty between two leading nuclear powers gets eroded, it has an effect at the regional level as well, because any side at the regional level might take it to be an acceptable behavior to walk away from agreements. As for the scientific perspective, I believe this is very important. I believe a majority of people in South Asia, they don't even know about the consequences of nuclear war. And whenever there is a conflict between Pakistan and India, we hear many voices supporting the use of nuclear weapon or ultimate punishment to the adversary. So if the scientists from two countries come together and they raise the awareness of people about consequences of nuclear war, that can be very helpful. And this is one of the CBMs, in fact, that Pakistan has been proposing to India. So I think the scientific perspective will be very useful. Just last point, there were many people who were trying to request the diplomats to be mindful of this aspect or that aspect. But I think in this era, the quality of the political leadership matters a lot. Diplomats, I think they are by training geared towards moving things towards peace. But we've seen that many countries which used to be erstwhile upholders of international norms, their positions change overnight. And our same colleagues, the diplomats which were one day fighting for some norm, the next day they are very hesitant to speak up in favor of that norm. So I think with all this rising right-wing populism in many countries and the quality of leadership, it becomes more and more difficult as diplomats to work for peace. And that is where that factor should be considered as to how much it will contribute to the success or otherwise of the NPT review conference. But I will tend to agree with Dr. Kent that ultimately every current has a counter current, and hopefully we will see a counter current towards the positive side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think, Nikita, we have one more very much requested question here in the first row, and then we'll get to the panel.
Thank you very much. I'm former Minister of Foreign Affairs. In 2009, in 1st March, with my colleagues, Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Central Asia, and Mr. Takayev, now he's a president, we signed it in Semipalatinsk, where Soviet Union tested nuclear arms, the agreement about free nuclear zone in Central Asia. It was last such zone established on our planet. And after perhaps 5 years, in 2014, 5 nuclear weapon countries who have the nuclear weapons, members of Security Council of United Nations, signed a protocol of negative assurances that they will. But they are political and legal, this. But there is not guarantee, mechanism of guarantee that this protocol will be not fulfilled or some threat will be. That's why I think now in the countries, in many countries, developing countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia and others rising some intention to obtain the nuclear arms, because guarantee giving to Ukraine, not fulfill it after the Ukraine its nuclear arms. It is one question, and how we should develop such mechanism, which will be assured the other countries which have concern about their security, because the countries who have the nuclear arms never attack it, but attack more countries who have no nuclear arms. It is first question, how we should work. Because we more world community focus it on climate change. But if there will be a full-fledged threat which rises now, it will be more worse, and humankind will be survive or not. It is very serious threat. Second, artificial intelligence. Now, with a growing role and impact of artificial intelligence, they're rising the concern about using by non-state subjects artificial intelligence for easily have access to technology of nuclear arms as to biological arms. That's why there is the same, not yet unity for developing some international structure or governance, global governance on this issue. That's why how we should face these threats. We should have the same concern as a climate change to these two issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So at this stage, I will just revert back to the panel for 2-3 minute responses on any questions you would like. And I would like to start with Kent again.
The question that I felt maybe coming my way was the one between India and Pakistan. I think one thing that I didn't mention before, we see a lot of new countries becoming mediation actors, actually. It's been quite clear the last 2-3 years. I mean, countries like Qatar, UAE, Saudi, China, others trying to play a constructive role in mediation. So it's not just civil society and think tanks and so on, but and that is something positive because they have surprised us a few times, actually. And then we, of course, we have a president in the US also who is very ambitious on the area. And if it's ambitions in this field to try to settle conflicts, it's many times much more complicated than quick deals or so. It takes, it's complex and there's underlying factors, and it's many times multi-layered, and it also takes quite a long time to settle a long-time conflict. So we know, I'm not an expert in India, Pakistan, but we of course have followed over the decades that the tension have arisen and come up from time to time. So there's many things that needs to be dealt with. So the mediation actor that would support settlements of those issues needs to have a long-term perspective. But in the end of the day, it's the two parties themselves that needs to sort out these issues, and that is what needs to take place. So I think mediation actor comes in a moment when there isn't that kind of dialogue between the parties. But I think India and Pakistan have all the possibilities to find that space of having that direct dialogue. Maybe sometimes there can be, when my own country, Sweden, tried to support dialogue between the US and North Korea, we were very clear on saying we are not mediators, we are facilitators. And that is something different than mediators. So sometimes a facilitator can be something that can be supportive, but I think when it comes to India and Pakistan, I think you have the ability to find that kind of possibility to have that dialogue, and even if you might need a facilitator from time to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. Daria?
Yes, I will try to answer the NPT questions. And first, on the question of the negative security guarantees in the regional nuclear weapon-free zone treaties, it is true that they are not legally binding. especially the American treaties, they are not approved by Congress, and you can say that they are not binding. But there is some moral, so far no one has attacked, no nuclear weapon country has attacked a nuclear weapon-free zone country. So there's historical evidence. But there are two solutions to this problem that have been discussed, especially in Finland. I think Finland also presented them as at the last review conference, that actually there could be an annex to the NPT treaty, which said that none of these 5 nuclear weapon states, but also possibility with the 4 others, to actually sign a treaty where they agree not to attack any countries in these nuclear weapon-free zones. You have to separate the other non-nuclear states and the nuclear weapon-free zones, because countries in nuclear weapon-free zones, they don't have nuclear programs, they have double commitment to nuclear weapon-free status. They have signed the NPT, they have also signed the regional treaty. So this could be, annex could be a possibility. Another possibility was a legal treaty about this, so that it would be international law to respect what they have said. Secondly, on the question of the poles, of course, in multipolar world, there is this theory of the poles being civilizational, that is, understanding that countries join together because they share a civilization. And this is, of course, also supposed to create more trust, because you share your basic values and views and so forth. But of course, we have Huntington, who actually presented that the clash of civilizations that will be on the borders, because civilizations are not so clearly separable, and what happens in the borders, and are there clashes. But in a way, I think that it is true that civilizational communities probably have greater trust than other communities where there are a lot of conflict. So this is the idea of the poles, and whether it would be ever possible to divide the world into a number of poles, it's an open question. But I think civilization has been the basic understanding. And I think Huntington said that since civilizations are trust-building mechanisms, it would be possible for all civilizations to have nuclear weapons, because there would be no risks involved. I would disagree with that, but I think this was his comment in a way. And a third question about WMD-free zone in the Middle East. It was the 1995 agreement that something should happen. There was a planned conference in 2012 which didn't happen. It has been a continuous discussion, and having followed the JCPOA, the Iran deal, very closely, I think the nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East is not about nuclear weapons. It's about power. And so the JCPOA, the rational argument for the JCPOA was that everybody should support it, since it actually made Iran a non-nuclear country for the future. But this was not the case. There was opposition within the Middle East against the JCPOA, and also this question of militarization now is a different degree of non-proliferation, which is difficult to build trust.
Thank you. Marcelo?
So I think 2 questions revolve around at least 2 unfinished business in the NPT. The first one is about the negative security assurance. So representing my own region from Latin America and the Caribbean, we have the view that those assurances have never done fully. Yeah, the nuclear weapon states have put, say, interpretative clauses to Annex 2 of the local treaty, which for us amount to reservations to the treaty. So every single year we approach the 5 nuclear weapon states to withdraw their clauses, and any of them have already indicated a willingness to so do it. We think this is the very minimum that nuclear weapon states should give to countries that have forsworn nuclear weapon states. And in my view, is one of the, say, less complicated issues at the agenda of the Conference of Disarmament. I do not see any problem for nuclear weapon states provided those assurances. What's the threat that countries for Latin America and the Caribbean can pose to the 5 nuclear weapon states? So it would be any decrease, if any, of their security and a boost to our own security. So if you take the 4 issues, you know, in the CD, for me it's the lowest hanging fruit. So I cannot understand how this issue is still pending in Geneva. So that's my view on the NSAs. So what prevents the 5 countries in the Security Council to pass a resolution, giving negative security assurance, as long as we have our commitments to the IAEA and safeguards in place. So the second one is about the nuclear weapons free zone in the Middle East. Also, a very worrisome unfinished business in NPT was part of the deal for the RevCon in '95. It is regrettable. It's regrettable that still we are discussing this, more than 20 years. So in our view, it's we should really make all efforts to advance to this, Now, also my Egyptian colleague asked, to whether the IAEA will have a part in the GST and GV. So, well, the composition will be for member states, for state parties, so there'll be no place for international organizations to be part of the group per se. But I like to also, at the same time, to read, say, operative paragraph 5 of one of the objectives of the GST would be to identify and consider technical changes and possible approach to nuclear disarmament verification in terms of tools, techniques, process, and procedures, and appraise knowledge of nuclear disarmament verification derived from past and ongoing initiatives. So I think from that perspective, I think the IAEA have a lot to contribute to the work of this group. Threshold of failure of the NPT. Well, I see at least 3 scenarios. There is low deaths of NPT, start the continual erosion of the NPT, people states parties not complying with the basics. This is low deaths. Well, a fatal blow, if any of the nuclear weapon states perhaps use nuclear weapons, in my view, perhaps would be a fatal blow to the NPT. Or we can have a revival. We can have, a recommitment to the NPT in the upcoming 2026, Very briefly, perhaps addresses some of the points made by distinguished Pakistani ambassador. I also believe that, even for countries not party to the NPT, any, I would say, advance in the 3 pillars can be regarded as a public good. So I also subscribe to your understanding on this. I believe, there is no separation between regional and international dynamics. Also, I much align with what you have said, and also I also in agreement that scientific cooperation is always a CBMs. That's the underlying principle of our proposition for the group of scientific technical experts on nuclear disarmament verification. Last but not least, how we should avoid, that other countries should acquire nuclear weapons. I think the point made the last question. Well, I would respond that we have to adhere to the norms of non-proliferation. I think, like Andreas Persbo has said in his opening remarks, I don't think that the world would be safer if you have more countries possessing nuclear weapons. And I have an apologetical stance against nuclear deterrence. I think the nuclear deterrence rests on very flimsy ground. It's based on threat, yeah. It can, yeah, it does not work in case of misperception, failure, both human in command and control. It's like to extinguish fire, putting oil on that. That's, you know, that's the logic of nuclear deterrence. Unlike conventional deterrence, nuclear deterrence cannot fail. And most of all, do not take into account the security concerns of countries that do not have nuclear weapons. So just take into account their security concerns. So this is my points against, you know, the doctrines of nuclear deterrence.
Thank you, Marcelo. And Sarah, would you like to close our panel with your responses?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. On the AI point, I think it's not the knowledge that's dangerous or the tool. I mean, it's pretty easy from basic physics to figure out how to build a nuclear weapon. It's going to be the responsibility of export control regimes to make sure people aren't acquiring the materials. That's the hardest part of anything. You know, we've seen programs struggle in the past because they don't have access to materials, not because they don't have access to the knowledge. So I'm a little less worried about AI and non-state actors in that sense. I think for the bio side, that's definitely a danger, but I'm not a bio expert, so I can't really speak to that. On the question about the defense of what the CTBT or the NPT has built, I think it's a great point. You know, one of the points that I was bringing up is it's really easy to continue cooperation once you already have it. It's really hard to build it up from scratch. So we should really be defending what's already there, because once it's gone, it's going to be really hard to rebuild. But I'm positive in that, like, this momentum is going. It might be slowing down, but I don't see a full reversal. You know, it's going to be hard to dismantle a bunch of monitoring stations around the world. It's going to be hard to dismantle a whole safeguard system. That costs more money than just continuing it the way it is. So I think it's a great point, and it's a good way to frame things for diplomats. Yeah, thank you so much for your points on the scientific cooperation. I think as scientists, and not even just scientists, as people that work in this field, it's important for us to talk about these risks. And, you know, thankfully or not thankfully, it's been brought into popular culture, the book from Annie Jacobsen. You know, we have House of Dynamite, we've got Oppenheimer. These things are becoming more in the public consciousness, and you know, we've got BBC remaking Threads, which is a horrific movie, but one that everybody should see, as it really does show how society will break down. So I think that there are positive things, and I think, again, thank you so much for convening this panel, because this is a good way to talk about these issues and bring it to the public consciousness.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, let's give a round of applause to our speakers. Just to close our event today, I just would like to thank all of you, Ken, Daria, Marcelo, Sarah, for making the time, for coming and participating in the panel. It's a very difficult topic. It's very hard to be positive, especially in the times we live in, but I think it's very important to talk about things where we can find common ground and agreement, because there is no progress unless we find those points and actually work towards them. I think there have been really many ideas today, despite all the doom and gloom that is happening around. Some reading and movies, recommendations as well. So probably, you know, something to watch afterwards, after this event or during the weekend. Yeah, and I just wanted to close by saying that even if it feels like there is no hope, we all here today in this room, we all made time to come and to talk about these issues for 2 hours. And I think that proves that there are so many people that care about these issues, that work towards a better life, a better world, and a safer world. And I think this gives me specifically, a very important idea and very major hope that we can build a safer world in 2026 and beyond. Thank you so much.